I'd like to share with you a tale of two interviews. I recently interviewed some job candidates, and I want to share these with you because it'll demonstrate the importance of active listening in interviews. It's the same job, two highly qualified candidates. Candidate number one. This individual arrived late, and she had very valid excuses. There was heavy traffic. She had difficulty finding the parking structure. She had difficulty finding a parking spot in the structure. She was a little confused about our location. All of her excuses were valid. And she was only 5 minutes late. It wasn't that huge, but it did have a profound impact on our initial impression of this young lady. Because when I interview somebody, if they're not on time for the interview, the first thought that goes through my mind is, are they going to be late for work? Is this going to be a constant occurrence? Is this going to be something that we're going to be regretting later on? If somebody cannot show up on time for an interview, then it's very doubtful that the interviewer will assume they'll show up on time for work. And people are looking for people who are reliable in business. This young lady also had a business casual appearance. Now, while business casual is accepted in most workplaces these days, it is not an acceptable look for an interview. Regardless of the job for which you're interviewing, you need to come professionally dressed. You need to have on your very best look. It needs to be crisp, it needs to be professional, and it needs to be above and beyond what even the job expectations are. And the other thing that this individual did that really, I think, created a very negative response from me was she talked at me while apologizing, not to me. She was so hyper and so busy with her apologies, and because she was nervous, because she had already set herself up for failure simply by being late for that interview. So she was talking at me while she apologized. During the interview, she missed many of my body language cues. When I looked as though I was not that interested in what she was sharing, she continued to go on sharing, rather than paying attention and shifting and focusing on something that was more relevant to the conversation we had previously had. Her posture was very stiff. She sat up straight in her chair, but she never moved, and she was very stiff in her posture. She said all of the right things in the interview, but she sounded very rehearsed. It didn't seem real or sincere, and she wasn't engaged in the conversation. I never was able to connect with her because it felt so rehearsed, it felt so fake that I really couldn't connect. She did not demonstrate active listening skills. She sent negative messages through her body language. She was fidgeting. She wasn't making eye contact. There were a lot of mistakes this young lady made. And I was disappointed because when I first saw her resume, I thought, she's perfect for this job. She had all the skills we were looking for. She seemed like the perfect candidate. So I was very disappointed after interviewing her. Candidate number 2 arrived for his interview. He arrived 15 minutes early. He waited out in the waiting room. The first thing he did was, when he arrived, is he walked over to the receptionist, greeted her warmly, thanked her for the opportunity to be there, and introduced himself. He went and took a seat. When I came out to meet him to invite him back for the interview, he stood up to greet me and immediately offered his hand in a handshake. It was a nice, firm handshake. He allowed me to lead the beginning section of the interview. I did most of the talking. I wanted to set the stage for what I was looking for. I wanted to give him some real clear clues about what was most important to me so that to see if he was able to adapt his interview skills to meet the needs of the job based on my perspective and what I think is most important. He carefully observed my body language, and when he noticed at times that maybe he wasn't getting through, he shifted his message and his posture slightly to re-engage with me. He responded with ease to my open-ended questions. Both of these candidates were very qualified people. Candidate number 2 had excellent posture that mirrored my style. When I leaned back and relaxed a little bit, he waited a beat or two, and then he leaned back and relaxed a little bit more. He tuned into the key information that I was sharing in those questions and in my overview of the company, and he responded at appropriate times with examples that reflected what was most important to me. He was engaged throughout the interview with well-thought-out questions, and he conveyed warmth in his personality. And when I talk about well-thought-out questions, when you go to an interview, you need to also know what questions you need to ask, because it's the questions you ask that demonstrate engagement with the interviewer. So let's talk about the impact of active listening on your career success. It all begins with the interview. Because during the interview, you have the opportunity to position yourself as a reliable and trustworthy individual. A very successful interview and active listening skills enhance your professional credibility. Companies are more likely to invest in you as an employee when you can be viewed as a team player. It will set you apart from all the other candidates. Active listening is a skill that must be learned. It's not a passive exercise, it's active. You do need to practice, and others will pay greater attention to you when you speak if you have demonstrated strong active listening skills during the interview.